Welcome back to MidPoint. National Security Analyst for ClarionProject.org, Ryan Mauro joins us. Ryan, I want to turn to Pakistan in a moment, but let's go back to what happened in Australia here and some of the ideological that you're talking about. One thing we didn't cover. We are looking at an individual who was allowed to stay in the country, a refugee. This is someone who supposedly should have been kept track of by the Australian authorities. Let me just go ahead and propose something here. Are we looking at a time that we're eventually going to get to where if you want to come to this country or any other country, you need to be able to be tracked 24/7, and if you break the law once, this guy broke the law many times, and he got to stay in the country. Are we reaching a point where we're going to have a basic one-shot-and-you're-out policy here in order to protect us from these ideologists and keep them from becoming ingrained in the society?
Oh, definitely. I don't think that it's going to move towards 24/7 monitoring. But yes, you get arrested and you get convicted of something, then you're out of here. That's what it's going to come to, and I think that's what's going to follow in Australia right now. If you look at the Australian websites, they're already talking about modifying their immigration laws because this guy came over to Australia from Iran in 1996. He was supposedly a refugee. He immediately starts acting up. He has between 40 and 50 incidences of sexual harassment or sexual abuse. He's now been implicated in torching his ex-wife to death. So by any standard, this guy should not have been there. And what's really shocking for me is the fact that Sheikh Harun apparently was not on Australia's terror watch list. How that makes sense, I have no idea, because even analysts like myself knew about the extremism of this individual long before this incident happened.
Does it not mean, though, that we're reaching a point in this society, whether it's America or Australia, there has to be a complete vetting of an individual who wants to come in this country and stay here for any length of time? We have to know more about them because, and again, I'm not trying to say that just because somebody believes in a religion or they're a certain color, whatever, that's not the point. We're talking about knowing their background and knowing that they can be a danger to the society, and that in itself is strictly what 21st century life is going to be, whether we like it or not.
I don't know that it's inevitable that's going to come to that, but I think that events like this are going to force us to seriously consider it. And you know what? I hope that we do have more scrutiny of individuals who are coming here, because coming to the United States or Australia or anywhere else is a privilege. It's not a right. You don't have a right to come here just because you exist. If you come here, you should be able to pass a background check. You should not be stoking extremism. It doesn't even have to be Islamic extremism. If you're a supporter of racism or sexism or anything like that, you don't deserve a spot here. Someone else should take your spot for you.
Who's going to make that decision, though? Isn't that the biggest question?
Well, that's going to have to be the federal government and to some degree the states.
And that becomes dangerous in itself, because then you start people starting to make decisions that aren't logically based, and then you have all those isms that walk into somebody else's opinion as well. This is a discussion for another time. Couple of minutes we have here. In Pakistan, 141 people are dead, 132 children. This is the Taliban. How do we then, outside of the lone wolf, how do we start looking for these people? What do we need to do to find them? Because they are always trying to, when they're not in a group, they're trying to keep themselves private and quiet so they can't be found. What aren't we doing?
Well, in terms of those that are quiet, that's why it ultimately does have to come down to facing the ideology, working with Muslim communities especially, in order to find them out. And there have been many cases where Muslims have helped the NYPD or the FBI in finding these individuals. But in Pakistan specifically, we know of lots of terrorist camps that continue to exist, have existed for years. They're going to have to be eliminated. And in terms of the ideology, it's not just about the Pakistani Taliban. You have other groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and these other groups that have schools and hospitals. There's even been reports recently about schools in Pakistan that are still praising Osama bin Laden. So we've got to go after the infrastructure that leads to things like this, not just the individuals perpetrating them.
45 seconds. Are we afraid to face this ideology simply because of political correctness?
I think so, but it's a political correctness limited to the West. And what I mean is that if I say Islamist, there's groups out there that will say, well, that's Islamophobic. You're spreading anti-Muslim bigotry. But if you look at the press in the Arab world, especially in places like Egypt, they use terms like radical Islam or political Islam or Islamist constantly, and everyone knows what it means and no one gets offended.
Fair to say then that our head is in the sand, and overseas they certainly understand the danger point here, but we just don't want to face it yet.
Right. Places like the Middle East understand this much more than we do. And that's why you have the White House currently saying that the Muslim Brotherhood is nonviolent and not a terrorist group. You look over in the Middle East, not just the governments, but the average people there, many of them are saying to the U.S., what are you doing? Of course this is a radical group. Of course they believe in violence.
Unfortunately, we still have to come to grips with what the 21st century world is. ClarionProject.org is where you're at. Ryan Mauro, we want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. If we don't see you before then, have a very Merry Christmas.
You too. Thank you.
All right, take care. A new Surgeon General is on the job, but have we reached the point where this position is simply no longer necessary? And then there comes out to Ebola and lies in 2014. Nick Tate makes the house call right after the break on MidPoint.